Welcome into another edition of the Garden Report, coming at you live from Washington, D.C., where the Celtics have just dropped 2 in a row and are now tied up in their best-of-7 series. The Celtics lost 121-102 against the Washington Wizards. I'm Joseph Pavone. I'm joined by a Boston media legend, Butch Stearns from...
Please, all that means is I'm old when you call me a legend.
You know, it still makes you legendary. Come on, Butch. Don't sell yourself short here. I appreciate you taking the time to break this one down. Butch from Boston 25. Butch, whenever you see a 26-0 run, I mean, we don't see it often, but when that does happen, typically the team does win. Unfortunately, the Celtics were on the bad end of that 26-0 run. What do you think happened throughout that stretch, and why did the Washington Wizards continue to come out with these huge runs against the Boston Celtics throughout this series?
Well, what I think happened is what's happened in the NBA for years. The refs favor the home teams in the playoffs, and I'm not trying to sound like Tommy Heinsohn. Isaiah Thomas went to the podium afterwards and said he didn't like it. I like to hear that from him. He's probably going to get fined. It tells me he's going to be into it and wants to expect the same type of treatment when he gets at home.
Right.
But let's give the Wizards a little bit of credit here. You don't go on a 26-0 run without really being intense, without really getting it done. But home court matters more in the NBA than almost any other sport. Football, baseball, even hockey, when it comes to the postseason. And I think the Wizards and Celtics are proving that. This is now 8 games they've played, counting the regular season.
Right.
And not one road game has been won by an opposing team.
But, Butch, a lot of these turnovers are coming at tough stretches. I mean, in that third quarter, of course, there were a lot of Celtics turnovers. And one of the biggest things that's been plagued this Boston Celtics team has been their opening quarter. That wasn't the case tonight. They had a great first quarter for the first time this series. And, of course, comes the third quarter, and we saw a completely different ball team.
Well, they saved their opening quarter woes for the second half.
Right?
I mean, they led 24-20. Al Horford talked to us in the locker room afterwards, and he said he was proud of how they played on the defensive end.
Right.
They only gave up 20 points. I mean, I think the least they'd given up in the first 3 games was like 36 in each of the games they did. So they did play well, but Washington really just wanted it more than them in this second half. And that was part of it. To your point about the turnovers, though, they got to take care of the ball better. There's no doubt it's a cliche. It sounds like that, but that just snowballed from there. I mean, think about this, Josue. They scored the first 5 points of the second half to take a 5-point lead, and then Washington went on the 26-0 run. So they got to stop that.
One of the questions that Sherrod Blakely asked Brad Stevens, and he took it from me because I couldn't wait to ask him because it was driving me nuts, the timeout situation. I know the stretch was about, I want to say 11 or 12-0 run before Stevens ultimately decided to take that timeout. Do you think it was a bad idea for him to not call an additional timeout and let that run stretch to 26? Do you think it makes much of a difference? What's your take on that?
Well, I think it's a legitimate criticism. I mean, when that team goes on a 26-0 run, you got to try to stem the tide any way you can. But really, I think that was a run that snowballed faster than I've seen a lot of runs ever, the way it happened. I mean, they had 2 3-point plays in a row, the Wizards did. So you had stoppages there, and then they had turnovers after that. So should Stevens have called a timeout? Well, yes, in hindsight. It's like asking me if John Farrell should have taken Craig Kimbrell out if he gave up the game-winning home run. It's the wrong move based on the result.
Right, absolutely. Well, we'll see how this Celtics team bounces back. I can't wait to see what's going to happen at the Garden Game 5. Which Celtics team are we going to see? I mean, because they certainly look rattled. Isaiah Thomas not only complained about the foul situation, he didn't get to the free throw line once, but he also talked about his guys being what he called shook. You know, not wanting to knock down those big shots. And he says that his guys have to be able to knock down those big shots because they got a lot of open looks in this game.
Yeah, and piggybacking off that, Al Horford said afterwards, he was asked if there was a frustrating thing watching the 26-0 run. He said, no, it was a learning experience. So I think you're right. You hear Isaiah say they were shook. You hear Al Horford, 2 leaders on the team, saying it was a learning experience. This is still a young team, so they do have to learn from that. And Wednesday night is Game 5.
It's going to be a big one. We're going to break that one down in part 2 of the Garden Report. This is a wrap for part 1. Stay tuned for part 2. We'll talk about Game 5, and we'll also get into what we can expect from the Celtics bench as Brad Stevens continues to throw out a different starting 5, it feels like, throughout this entire series. Stay tuned for part 2 coming up next.